All right, we're here. We're on week 3, I believe, of Cybersecurity Month in October. So it's going by pretty quick and exciting. I love all the social media content that people are generating and lots of good posts and articles and just general content. So it's always exciting to see the whole community kind of come together and raise awareness in this interesting topic we always have to fight and defend against, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Well, October is a great month in San Diego, as is. The weather is still nice during the day.
it's second summer down
A
here.
little chilly at night, and then all the tourists are gone, so we get to enjoy
That's right.
everything here.
That's right.
Second summer for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have I think phishing this one, not FI but PH, right? Not to
Yeah.
be confused for those of you out there that don't know what phishing is. So we'll kind of
It's not
walk
sushi,
through that.
I
Yes.
promise.
yeah. I had
Not
sushi last
quite.
night actually, so pretty good.
Nice.
Pretty good
Yeah.
relevancy.
Not getting bluefin out of this fishing though, unfortunately.
No, so I think we have a couple of things we kind of talked through phishing, maybe like what it is, different forms of phishing, how we can kind of combat it. So we'll kind of walk through a few things and we'll go from there. So I don't know, Sammy, from your perspective, you want to kind of take us through technically what kind of phishing is and what it kind of entails, and we'll just dive right in.
Yeah. Well, really, phishing kind of falls under the social engineering umbrella, which is basically manipulating human psychology to get them to perform unwanted actions that are potentially harmful to them, either financially or digitally.
Sure.
And really, the goal of the attacker here is to gain either sensitive information or to have the victim maybe perform some kind of financial transaction unknowingly. And then so phishing is one of the vehicles that we can use to basically, in no pun intended, to lure targets into performing these unwanted actions. This will take place electronically over email or even SMS, and will contain basically malicious pretext or language to entice you into performing whatever that action is. And the reason I say action is because there are a lot of ways to exploit this. They might have you click on a link, download a file, or maybe even just provide information, right? If they're able to convince you enough
Sure.
to who they are. So yeah, many ways you can slice it.
Yeah, I think some examples we see, it's like, hey, this is your IT department, here's a password reset, or I'm so and so, here's a financial report, please click this thing. It's all about getting you as a user to click that link, right? I think that's the biggest takeaway here. It's getting someone to click the link, and then, like you said, maybe they take you to a fake web page that looks like your bank provider or your company website, and then enter credentials, or it looks like a Facebook account or LinkedIn. It's just tricking that human element to say, hey, this looks good. It looks safe to me. Let me go ahead and enter what I normally do. And then that's how they capture credentials or do a much more sophisticated type of attack. But it's faking a website or faking a person email and getting that behavior of click this link, right?
Yep, that sense of urgency to do something right now should be the biggest red flag, in my opinion. So I know this little thing I pulled up here about hook, line, and sinker. I think that helps describe it quite a bit, because that's their goal, is they're trying to hook you in, then you click the link, and then bam, you're caught at that point. So key things to always look out for are like attachments, a link or URL to click on. It's very easy for the attackers to go in and change what's called HTML code behind the scenes. And it looks like it's a legitimate URL, but when you hover over the link, the actual URL that you're going to shows up. And then that can be the malicious one that might be misspelled or have a hyphen in it,
Right.
or something else that draws the user to going to that website.
Yeah. No, they're really looking to manipulate the technology of the emails, as well as to play on your emotions, because people tend to overlook steps or policy when they're emotional, when they feel, like Brian mentioned, a sense of urgency or fear or whatever that may be. So typically the language will be urgent in nature, or perhaps secretive. That way the victim doesn't feel the need to communicate that with others. And so using a combination of these things, they'll constantly change the way that they target employees to be more convincing or be more relevant to the person or the organization. And this is actually known as spear phishing, right? Which is where it's highly targeted. And so, yeah, as we've seen during the pandemic, the ways that they've approached this have really changed, whether it be impersonating CDC or impersonating certain organizations that are related to COVID, or government mandates and financial institutions, basically taking advantage of the situation to get them to interact, or more likely interact with what they're trying to do. So a lot of different elements here, and over time these things tend to evolve. One thing, you can control the inflows and outflows of traffic to your organization, but without cutting email off entirely, you're always going to have that inbound threat from that attack surface. So you can remediate the technologies, but at the end of the day, it's like really up to the individuals, the humans, to be able to understand when they're dealing with somebody who's potentially impersonating someone or acting as a threat, to be able to stop that threat. And so that takes a level of vigilance and really knowing what kind of stuff is out there. So
yeah, that's another good point too. Is from a human aspect, like we see all the time, like new hires are highly targeted because like in a big company, you might get an email, oh, it's from the CIO or CEO or somebody, but like it's worded differently and it doesn't look right, and like the names will be kind of just very formalized. I'll say, hey, really urgently, I need you to do something for me. Or what they'll do is they'll say, hey, I'm going to start the communication via email and then take it off channel and say, hey, okay, text me at this number or WhatsApp or whatever. So it's kind of like that initial fish or spearfish is this the entry hold, and they want to take things offline or different channels and things like that. And to your point, technology can only work so well, right? And stopping everything is, I think we all know it's almost impossible. So training the users, running simulations and campaigns, and actually testing your users, often is really important, right? To tell them, hey, here's what you look for. This doesn't look right. Here's to be mindful. And, like when in doubt, call the person, like all these things we talk about on the show a lot, trust but verify. All these things become like really good tools that you can use to fight the fish, so to speak, right? And things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. You bring up a good point with, sometimes they'll want to take the communication out of band because they want to circumvent the controls that an organization may have in place. Because an organization will have the investment made in these softwares or these email gateways, as they call them, which basically search for these type of threats. But your personal mobile phone may not be equipped with those controls or those technologies, so they're more likely to get success there, or go without being detected if they take it out of band that way. And then yes, to your point, so how do you able to identify these? Well, you have to perform regular simulations with the most modern types of attacks. That way, it's on the top of people's mind, because really where it's successful is in complacency, when people stop being vigilant, when people stop paying attention, and then it just takes one email to really make it happen. And it doesn't always have to be technical, right? We've had situations where people have fallen victim due to just the language that was used. It was convincing. It was really early in the morning, and Correct. It was impersonating a high-ranking individual. That made it so that the victim would act without thinking, because it was coming from a direct order, seemingly
a superior type of person.
Exactly, right? So they're exploiting that threat, and in that situation, there is no technical control that would have stopped that, right? It was all in the language, and so that's where education is really important. So you can start to be like, hey, this looks a little suspicious. This doesn't look like a typical situation, right? Even if it's coming from internally. That's one of the bigger issues that's happened in 2021 is the business email compromise, where you're getting legitimate business accounts compromised, and attackers are launching attacks from there in a much more stealth manner. And the only way that you would be able to detect these is that the requests are untraditional, right? Or they're out of policy. So that goes back to training and really making sure that your employees know how to handle these types of requests.
Yeah. And you kind of touched a little bit earlier too. So we have kind of, email phishing, we have some text, we have some voice. So I don't know, Brian, like what are some other ones you kind of see and have seen out there? And
Well,
just
text
different
message is
bridges
a big
of.
one. I keep getting one from Chase saying that my account's disabled, and I'm like, well, that's great. I don't have one there, so just keep sending it,
Yeah.
right? And then I know like things that you can do to help in that arena. Well, so back to BEC actually, I want to close that gap a little bit. So there's the vendor email compromise and then business email compromise, kind of along the same lines, if you will. And so you might have all of your controls in place and accurate and have 2FA and multi-factor and the right spam solutions and everything in place, but the vendor or the other business that you transact with may not. And that's usually where the breach occurs. And now it looks like it's a legitimate email. All the training that you did for your end users, it passes the muster. It came from that place. You can check the email headers and everything lines up. And it was whatever email system that they use in the background and all those things. And then they modify, say, the invoice. And now it has a new ACH number on there. And bam, the person gets caught. The routing number might be the same, because these attackers are smart enough to go open bank accounts at that bank and then just have the account number that might be updated. And then they'll often update a phone number in there. So I think that's one of the hottest trends right now that we see, because it's hard to get that money back. Once it's been wired over, it's very difficult because they go take it and sweep it off to Bitcoin or some other currency very rapidly, so that it's hard to trace back. But I think mobile attacks are very common nowadays. It's harder. Like there is no mouse on a smartphone, so it's a lot easier to just click the link and it pops up. The browsers, the way that they make the screens, you don't get the URL bar that stays up there. So that's another thing that kind of happens from that aspect. And then just getting you to click on something. I mean, people can even click on an ad. Can have another variable in there to look for that. The malicious guys will pay for the ads. You click on it. Oh, I'm interested in that. Or I can get a $10 free Amazon gift card if I click on that. You fill it all out. Now they have your information. They turn around and they phish you based on the information you just provided. Or social media.
Yeah.
What do you have out there in social media? Do you have your dog's name out there? Do you have your dates of birth and your anniversary dates and all the key things, the colors of your cars and all these things that you can answer questions to? It's probably out there. So go check your privacy settings, because that's how they get dialed in on these attacks. The ones that really want to come after you will dial it in to that level.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Is, often these attacks, these phishing attacks are so successful because there's so much available information out there on the targets. So that when they build these profiles, they're very convincing. They include pieces of information that may be relevant, perhaps a location, a time. They speak the same language, right? Because they understand maybe how you are as a person. Because like Brian mentioned, maybe your privacy settings aren't necessarily restrictive, and you have Toto on your Instagram feed. So and then they then know that with this information they can try and manipulate that aspect of it. But I want to circle back to when you mentioned vendor email compromise, because these are particularly malicious, because not only does it take advantage of a pre-existing compromised account, but this can infect entire industries. Because imagine a vendor who works with thousands of customers, say an HR vendor, right, or an HR company, and one of those accounts gets compromised. Well, they have thousands of clients. Now, what attackers do as well to remain stealthy is, once they've actually compromised these accounts, they may just sit on it for months at a time just to understand the organization. They'll read all the emails, they'll understand the policy, the standard operating procedures of the business, the language. And then not only that, they'll delete evidence of their own presence. So maybe they'll send emails out, immediately delete them. Maybe once they receive emails, they'll forward them to a separate email to maintain this stealth position. And then over time, you can launch these stealth type attacks where even once the transfer has been performed, the company doesn't know that they've been compromised, right? They think it's a legitimate invoice until a year later on the balance sheet. It's like, why do we have over $200,000 to this random company or this random service? And then you look back and you realize somebody has been paying these without ever raising a red flag. Vendor email compromise is extremely malicious, very hard to detect, very rampant these days, especially with the amount of compromises that have happened with exchange and all the email information that's been released just this year alone. So if one of these major third-party vendors is caught, the only way that you're really going to know this is happening is if you have a keen understanding of the business and its procedures. Like, are you supposed to be sending wire transfers without first authorizing that with somebody else? Do you have dual authorization, right? Two people should maybe be authorizing any of these kind of wire transfers. So, very, very malicious thing to be vigilant of.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. It's, you can't always solve everything with a technical control, right? This is where, especially in the vendor email compromise, I mean, we've seen tons of examples of this. And, this is where you have your auditing and your compliance and governance kind of teams really auditing the financials, saying, hey, this doesn't look right. And to your point, we've seen instances where someone's been in the network essentially watching the flow, and they get really sophisticated. So they know the chain of command of who signs what. So even the emails are tagged, person A signs first, person B second, person C is last. So like everything looks legit. So when it goes to finance, they're like, oh yeah, everything's here. It's signed the right order, XYZ, boom, release the funds. And then to your point, routing numbers are kind of generally the same. They're changing just the accounting number, so it looks all legit. And, it just takes one or two small little details to change everything. And then, bam, that's all it takes. The other thing I want to circle back on too is we're kind of talking a lot about email and text, but another kind of form of phishing really, which sadly has kind of really exploded lately, is QR codes. We kind of jokingly call them a hacker's best friend because, I can put a QR code on top of a QR code, and like you're not going to know what it is, right? I mean, you have to scan it first, and like, well, it looks okay, but how do you really know that? So even things like this, people are, somewhat now kind of programmed to scan these things, which is a little bit unfortunate, but be mindful. Like phishing can happen with QR codes, and they're probably not as sophisticated. They're probably just trying to just gather credentials and things like that, but it's very doable with how tech savvy we've become and kind of reliant on. I mean, you go to any restaurant now, it's like, scan this code for a menu. I'm like, no, I'll take a hard one, or go to the website directly and things like that, right?
Yeah, there's a restaurant nearby here that I met up with some friends, and they're all like, I want a menu. And they're like, no, we only do QR code. No, I want a menu. So they finally brought them over a menu. And then, you have to order online. No, I'm not scanning the QR code. You'll put my order. So they finally put the order in. But it's interesting how all that's changed. I mean, it's a double-edged sword because you're not handing your credit card over if you do the online ordering. But then how safe is their system overall? So it's kind of a catch-22 in that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the QR codes themselves, it kind of comes down to like, then you got to start thinking about your own account security, right? Because if this leads you to a site that's trying to steal credentials or collect cookies from you, or is running some malicious JavaScript in the background, then you better hope that all your other accounts are using 2FA and they don't have any vulnerabilities in their sites where those are exposed. So that's QR codes are definitely an underrated one that were exploited pretty heavily during the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think another interesting one that's kind of seeing an uptick now, and we'll kind of touch on a story, is really, like phishing or kind of phone phishing. Like where you get a call. I think the classic example that most of us have had is like, oh, it's the IRS calling you, or there's a warrant for your arrest. And, sadly, these types of things work, right? I mean, it is a form of phishing with social engineering. And, if you don't really understand this, or you think your bank's calling you and, things like that, these are all different forms of this, and, they kind of run rampant, and, they're hard to kind of really, defend against too, because it's really just a personality and training and understanding it, not really a technical control, unless you just don't have a phone. But everybody has a phone nowadays, right? And I think the example we had just recently was someone was doing a voice impersonation, like, kind of a deep voice type act, impersonating somebody at a bank, and they were able to get away with like $35 or so million in this scenario.
That's right.
So phone phishing is very real, and here to stay as well, right?
Yeah. It's phishing is one that is probably one of the oldest forms of social engineering and phishing, but still, like you said, very, very relevant because, especially in the situation you're talking about, where they leveraged deep fakes to alter the voice and create an even more convincing profile. It just shows how the combination of exploiting human psychology and then modern technology will just enables these threats to keep persistent, and then for the compromises to keep occurring. Because in that situation, he was convinced that the person he was working with was the same person that he was doing the deal with, and how would you be able to tell if they had the same voice, right? The only way you wouldn't is if it was kind of an unstandard operating procedure, right? It was maybe, and that's a very hard thing to enforce, because it comes down to like that human diligence. Humans tend to be lazy, tend to bypass steps or controls, and this is like an area where you really can't, and you have to dot your I's and cross your T's in order to be able to and to avoid that kind of compromise. So that's where the consistent simulations really help, because you get caught in a simulation, you're going to be on your guard. It's not to punish you, it's to raise this awareness. And then you're going to be on your guard, right? If you got caught, it's probably the best thing that could happen to you, because now when the real threat comes, you're already going to be hyper vigilant of that. And we see it with our engagements. The people that tend to get caught the first time around tend to almost be overly cautious afterwards, right? They're sending you every email. Is this a phishing email? Is this a phishing email? But that's the way we would want to be. I'd rather have to filter through all of the, I'd rather a little bit of alert fatigue than the opposite in this situation. And I know on the SOC teams are already suffering from that alert fatigue and log fatigue, but I think, phishing response teams probably could use a lot more of it. And so, and especially at the executive level, because, these individuals typically aren't told no as often and have more autonomy to do things without any kinds of checks and balances. And they have also the permissions to perform highly destructive actions. So, those people probably need it the most, even though they are the most resistant of taking this content.
Definitely. So. Well, as an end user, the easiest thing to do is go old school. Pick up the phone and call the person direct, and just validate before you click a link or do anything else. Do a sandbox if you can. There's a lot of free virtualization software. There's even browser virtualization nowadays that you can throw the URL into and validate if it's a legitimate one or not, so that you don't impact or get ransom on your machine, as an example. Yeah. So, but that's just the old school way, is look up the phone number and call it.
Trust but verify, as we always say.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a great point about the sandbox. If you're not sure, either just don't open it, or open it in the sandbox, or if it's a common site that you can navigate to through the browser, just navigate there yourself. You don't need to click the link, right? So,
bingo.
Like my bank, when they send a thing, I never click on the link. I go to the website, I log in, I go to their messaging system, and if it's not there, then it's a bogus message. And honestly, 7 out of 10 times, it's a bogus message.
Yeah. Or like if you think they call you, or they say like it's your credit card, great. Hang up the phone, call the number back your credit card, and just say, hey, I got a call from you guys. Was it you? Yes or no? Oh yeah, we're trying to reach you about XYZ. Great. Then it's that trust but verify. You gotta kind of use like that, your whole kind of like human gut instinct, right? There's a little bit of that to your point, like if you're talking to somebody that has, let's just say a voice, kind of changeover, but they don't use the words correctly, or like the speech pattern is different, you kind of have to trust your gut, like digital formats different, like written word, like you can probably tell, like if someone maybe says thanks a certain way, or capitalizes certain words, or kind of uses certain structure in their emails, and you get one that just looks like totally different, you're like, well, what the heck is this? Like, this doesn't look right. And then, so there's a little bit of that human element, like just natural curiosities, you got to kind of keep your guard up, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Right.
I've even noticed in Gmail recently where sometimes the messages don't go right to the spam. There's like post-processing that goes on that finally catches it. So you don't have to respond immediately. You can always wait 10, 15 minutes and then go check and see if it's still there. Because a lot of times they'll pull that message out, throw it into spam.
Yeah. For those of you that don't live in real-time email, that's great. I mean, I'm so behind on email. It's like, okay, it's probably processed
Yours
a week
is
ago.
safe if you haven't gotten
I'm good.
to it.
If it's important, someone's going to call me, or, whatever. So all good.
They'll send you that text message. Click the link, Derek.
Yeah. Click this link to win a free cash prize. No, I'm good. Like
spin the wheel.
That's a good way to a good approach, is just treat everything like it's an advertisement. I never click on advertisements, so I just assume everything's an advertisement until somebody calls me and lets me know, hey, did you see that email that you missed? So
Yeah.
Nice.
and obviously maybe we shouldn't be that negligent about it, but you know, one of the ways, at least for an organization, can avoid these large wire transfer type of compromises is just dual authorization. You know, having two people that have to authorize this transaction. That way, at least one of them may be like, hey, well, this doesn't match up with anything that we previously discussed, right? You know, that's not going to solve the link click problem or the attachment problem, but again, I think by directly going to the source of these things, you can kind of circumvent that. And you know, just between those two things alone, I think you can really limit a lot of the damage and risk that organizations face. But you know, that's a gap that requires investment in education, certainly, and policy, right? To review and you know, readdress the accounting policies for wire transfers. So
yeah. So I guess kind of wrapping up here, you know, maybe we can kind of give our viewers some samples and ideas of things they can do. I guess, you know, the first one for me would be, you know, you definitely want to have a good kind of spam filter and kind of email gateway in place as a checkbox. I mean, you know, like you still have to have one of those in today's day and age. I mean, I don't know the stats, but I'm guessing 95+% email a company gets is just garbage and spam anyway. So having that kind of first tier protection is still going to be pretty relevant and, you know, at your kind of edge there. So I don't know, Brian, what else would you recommend for our viewers?
I just go back to my old school tip. It's okay to pick up the phone and call someone and just trust but verify if it's something that needs to be addressed or dealt with, or something doesn't seem right. Like most accounting systems, you have to go in and change that account number. Well, you should put up the red flag at that point if it's a vendor that you've paid before. Or it's okay to send $1 and make sure that they receive that dollar before you process a big invoice. So there's other ways around some of that stuff as well.
yeah, definitely. And you know, goes back to having that vigilant mindset. For organizations, consistent simulations, consistent training. For individuals, you know, just try and you know, work out of band when it comes to links and attachments. Go to the official source. Don't work within the email. Verify any weird out of standard operating procedure requests. You know, overall, just maintain that sense of urgency when it comes to, or really I shouldn't say urgency, but sense of vigilance when it comes to looking for each of these emails. We've said it a bunch: trust but verify. But that really is the secret here, right? It's there is no silver bullet solution. The gateway helps get rid of low hanging fruit, but ultimately, it's just being aware, being conscious, and not just rushing through the emails. You know, to slowing down. Right?
Don't get click happy, right?
Yeah, don't get click happy. Slow down. Yeah.
And I guess like maybe the last couple I could think of is, you know, if you have accounts that support it, MFA, you know, where you can, email's a great one for that, you know, because it leads to your other banking apps and primary apps. So getting those things turned on is a big one. And then lastly, for all you kind of IT admins out there, changing your banner color, external email, you know, change it every couple of months from like yellow to red, orange, just so people are like, hey, like, why is the color different? And they think, oh, okay, this is external email. Let me slow down a little bit and things like that. So those are a couple I can think of at the end there. So
yep, and you can use if you're in Office 365, the external tag now.
Correct. Yeah.
As well if you use Office 365 Outlook and stuff like that from a licensing perspective, you can turn that on.
Yeah, just kind of gives the user a really good idea. So like if they see an email from the CEO that should be internal and it says external, you're like, well, that doesn't look right.
Should I really do that?
Red flag right here, you know. So little things like that just to kind of keep you humanly aware. So
awesome.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us on this one. You know, thanks for our viewers. Like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And
but don't click the link out there.
Only click the like link, thumbs up button.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.